Method acting is a technique where actors dive so deep into their roles that the character becomes part of their everyday lives. It's not just about acting, it's about staying in character even off set. When you think of famous method actors like Daniel Day-Lewis in Gangs of New York or Jim Carrey annoying everyone on set because that's who Andy Kaufman was, and Jared Leto's bizarre behavior of sending disturbing gifts to his co-stars while embodying the Joker are all infamous Hollywood stories. They say the method actor's devotion to their role knows no bounds. But what if I told you the greatest method actor to ever live wasn't any of these guys? It's not Joaquin, it's not De Niro, it's not even Christian Bale. I would dare to argue that the greatest of them all was Harland Sanders. Yes, the man behind Kentucky Fried Chicken. From the moment he donned that iconic white suit and adopted that unmistakable goatee, he lived in character until the day he died. It wasn't just marketing, it was method acting at its finest. Sanders wasn't just playing the Colonel, he is the Colonel. What's going on, guys? We're going to be trying something new on the channel, and this is going to be the first episode of Business Storytime. So while I understand that there are other channels out there that also tell business stories, I haven't really seen too many people do it from the lens of a business professional. So I'm going to do my best to keep it fun and entertaining, and I promise there will always be a lesson to be learned at the end of the video. So if you guys are ready, let's dive in. Harland Sanders was born on September 9th, 1890 in Henryville, Indiana. His father passed away when he was only 5 years old, so his mom had to go out and work. So she took a bunch of different kinds of jobs. She was a factory worker and she was a sewing worker, and Harland had to help her out around the house. So basically at 6 years old, he had to start cooking for his younger brother and sister, which is crazy to me. Now, he didn't do very good in school. So somewhere around the 7th grade, when he was 13 years old, he actually dropped out of school. He hated algebra, and his biggest gripe with it was that he was thinking that they got it wrong, where they're confusing all the numbers with letters now. So I'm not sticking around for this. So he dropped out of school for this reason. Now, since he dropped out, other than helping around with the house, he had to help out with the family financially. So his mother made him get a job himself. But because he was such a hothead, even at an early age, it was really hard for him to keep any jobs that he got. So, you know, he was a farmhand, a blacksmith, a ferry boat operator, but he would always get into fistfights with people for whatever reason. Now, one thing that kind of stood out to me was that he actually was in the military for a little bit. He joined at age 15 and then got discharged at age 16 because they found out that he lied about his age. So while it wasn't a dishonorable discharge, they did kick him out of the army. Age 18 is when he married his first girlfriend, Josephine King, and they immediately had babies, 3 babies to be exact. But again, she was really upset at him and annoyed with him like all the time because he was never able to hold down a job because he was constantly getting into arguments and fighting with people. There was even a time where he landed a job as a lawyer, and as a lawyer, he hit his own client with a chair. So he lost that job instantly and ruined his reputation. So he had to move away to another state in order to find other work. In 1924, he actually even worked for Michelin Tire Company for a little while, selling tires for them. But again, he was arguing with his manager and he lost his job then there too. So now he decided to hitchhike to another town. Now, this part is super lucky for him because he met a guy that when he was hitchhiking, he told him about his life story. And it turns out that the guy driving, he was an executive for Standard Oil. And he said to him, "Young man, how would you like to run a gas station?" So he's got nothing else to do. So he definitely took him up on this offer. Now, the problem with the gas station was that at the time, people were generally loyal to the people who used to work there. So he didn't really get any business at first. But Harland Sanders really needed this job, so he worked really, really hard. Basically, he started winning the people over with his customer service, and now he's doing well for himself. So the moment he started to taste a little bit of success, what do you know? The Great Depression hits, and then he loses his job again. However, luckily for him, he gets offered a similar job at the Shell Corporation, but he has to move to Corbin, Kentucky in order to do so. Again, he has no choice, so he goes to Corbin, and then he sets up shop over there. Now, one of the customers that came in that day actually said something interesting to him, which was, where can a fella get a good meal around here? And that was the idea that hit him like lightning. So he decided to start offering food at the gas station. At first, it was just like, a 6-person table and just a couple of items on the menu, just like some ham, some biscuits, gravy, some string beans, stuff like that. However, later on, when he started to offer fried chicken, that's when the business really, really took off. It took off to the point where he was able to even install a motel and increase the cafe size from the 6-person table to 142 seats.
A shootout, right, is a shootout!
All right, guys, so this is the part of the story that's completely bonkers to me, right? So the story goes like this. Harland Sanders, being the businessman that he is, decided to start advertising. And what he did was that he painted signs along the highway. Now, this actually worked very well, and it diverted a lot of traffic over to his business. So somebody is going to be really upset about this, right? And it is the competing business across the street. His name was Matt Stewart. And Matt Stewart didn't like that at all, right? Because now you're messing with his livelihood. But rather than put up signs of his own and compete against Harland Sanders, he decides to take a bucket of paint himself and then just paint over his letters. Now, this is going to make Harland very upset, knowing very well that he is a hothead, and in the past that, he's gotten into fist fights all the time. He's fought with his managers all the time. And once when he was a lawyer, he even hit his client with a chair, right? So it's like he's totally like WWE style. Anyways, so Harland has threatened Matt with gun violence in the past. He's told him specifically, if you paint over my signs again, I'ma shoot you. And what does Matt do? He paints over his signs again. And this time, Harland is going to approach Matt one more time. Except this time, he shows up with 2 other guys. So Matt sees this, and then he just starts firing, right? And the first shot that he fired, it misses Harland, and it hits one of the guys that's with him, and it shoots him dead. So Harland having a gun of his own, he shoots back and he wounds Matt Stewart. Now the police show up and everybody is arrested. However, ultimately, Colonel Sanders was let go and he was labeled as self-defense, while Matt Stewart got 18 years. Now, there's so much more to unpack on this, because I've noticed that a lot of documentaries seem to gloss over a couple of facts on these things. And one of them is like this. The signs that was along the highway, they didn't belong to Harland Sanders, right? See, he was painting on barn doors and other building structures along the highway, except he had permission to do it. But what Matt Stewart was doing was painting over the words. So now, number one, Harland Sanders, he can't really complain about it because it's not his structure. Number two, who's to say if Matt Stewart was vandalizing the structures as opposed to restoring the structures with the same color coat of paint, right? But either way, this escalated very, very quickly. I think they're completely both in the wrong, right? Because this is obviously a business quarrel that just, turned to gun violence so quickly. And then once you're in Matt's shoes, when you think about it from his perspective, at that time in the 1950s, it's not crazy to assume that people live a life of frontier justice. And therefore, when you see Harland, who's threatened you with gun violence in the past, and you just painted over his side one more time, and then he rolls up to your joint with 2 other guys, right? It's not crazy to think that, okay, I think maybe he preemptively tried to defend himself. And then what ended up happening was he shot somebody dead. But I offer an alternative ending, right? That had Matt came out and he didn't bring a gun and he didn't defend himself, and then, Harlan shot him and wounded him anyways, it would have been Harland Sanders who was the one in jail, and we wouldn't have the KFC that we have today. So now with the competition out of the way and nobody to paint over his signs anymore, Harland is able to thrive and expand on his own. And he does exactly that. He starts to do very well for himself, that one day somebody calls in for 500 orders of chicken. And it's because of that, he decides, you know what, I'm going to do a new recipe just for this batch. Because before that, he was just doing salt and pepper. So it's because of this, that's how he started to develop his 11 herbs and spices blend. Actually, I think the main secret ingredient in it is white pepper, because white pepper just wasn't as prominent and often used at the time. He does so well for himself that people start to come in from adjacent states, and he even gets himself featured in a book at the time called the Duncan Hines Adventures in Good Eating, which is probably the equivalent of the modern day Zagat's Guide. So before we go on with the story, riddle me this. What do you suppose that famous people like John Voight, Jack Harlow, Loretta Lynn, Jimmy Carter, Muhammad Ali, and John Glenn all have in common? Surprisingly, they're all colonels. Now, they're not military colonels. This is a special honorary title given to them by the governor of Kentucky for anything outstanding related to the state of Kentucky. So basically, Harland Sanders, the colonel, he wasn't a military colonel by any means, because we mentioned earlier, if anything, he was discharged from the army at a very early age of 16 years old. So therefore, the colonel, all my life, I thought to myself, right, that the title of the colonel had something to do with authority and trustworthiness and it embodied some kind of standard, right? But it turns out it was just an honorary title given to him by the governor of Kentucky. And actually today, anybody could get the honorary Kentucky Colonel title if you go to this website and donate something like $50. So coming back, I think it's hysterical that all these famous people, had they leaned into the Kentucky Colonel title the same way that Harland Sanders did, today we might actually even have the Colonel of Hollywood, the Colonel of rap, the Colonel of country music, the Colonel of boxing, President Colonel, and why not the Colonel of space. So Harland's in an awesome spot right now. He has his honorary title of colonel given to him. He's got his 11 herbs and spices, and he was just featured in Duncan Hines. But as luck would have it, he opened a second restaurant because he was doing so well, but his first restaurant burns down on Thanksgiving Day of all days. So what does he do? He rebuilds the restaurant. But the moment he finally rebuilds the restaurant, World War II hits. So now all the tourism in that area is completely gone and there's no business anymore, forcing him to go out and look for jobs once again. He was even a midwife at some point and delivered 8 different babies. Now, it's not exactly clear how it happened, but he was stripped of his honorary title of colonel, but he got it back again in 1950. So he's been named colonel twice. And the second time that he was named colonel, this is exactly the time where he donned the iconic white outfit. And from then on, people can't call him Harland anymore. Now you all have to address him by the colonel all the time. And he just lived by the colonel all the time from now on. Nobody calls him Harland Sanders anymore. Now it's just full on 24/7, the colonel. So this is the part of the story where I need to jump around a little bit, because all of the stories out there and all the information available currently paints a same type of narrative that I kind of found inconsistent. Okay, so what I mean is this. So after 1945, the World War II is over. So business is back to normal again. And somewhere around this time, that after the colonel was reinstated as the colonel again, he got an offer for his North Corbin restaurant for $164,000. Now, in 1950, that's a lot of money. So during that time, he was asked if he wanted to sell, and then he thought to himself, he's like, no, my store is doing very well right now. It's right on the highway. I got plenty of, tourism traffic and stuff. Why would I sell to these people? That's crazy. But now again, luck is almost never on this guy's side. Immediately 6 months after, we hear news that they're going to build a brand new highway that's going to reroute all the traffic away from his current cafe, and it's going to be today's I-75. So this is the part of the story where most documentaries will have you believe that this is exactly the reason why Harland Sanders went on the road in order to save his livelihood. He had no money, and all he had was his Social Security check of $105 every single month. And he loaded his car with a couple of pressure cookers, his 11 herbs and spices, and true grit. He was turned down over 1,009 times, traveling across America trying to franchise his business. Now, here's where the inconsistency is. If you watch all of these documentaries at the same time, after they said he was 65 years old traveling the country, in 1952 is specifically when the first standalone KFC restaurant was built. So how does this make any sense? So 4 years prior to that, he already had his deal with Pete Harman, and Pete Harman had a chain of restaurants called the Harman Cafe. And at that time, they all had an additional sign outside of the shop that said featuring the Colonel's chicken. So it wasn't even called KFC at the time. In fact, it was Pete Harman himself who coined the term Finger-Lickin Good. And it was the guy that he hired to paint the billboards who changed the name to Kentucky Fried Chicken because he thought it would be really nice to have a certain Southern charm with the title rather than just calling it the Colonel's Chicken. The only reason why all of this happened is because when Pete Harman added the Colonel's dish to his menu, he said that his business tripled. So of course, he's there to support the idea of starting the first standalone KFC restaurant. So again, I say that this thing happened 4 years prior to them claiming that he hit the road. And a whole bunch of people started to come to Colonel Sanders for franchising rather than him going out on the road. So whether or not he actually went out on the road and was rejected 1,009 times, I can't confirm nor deny that. But to say that he didn't have a penny to his name other than that Social Security check, in my opinion, that's got to be a flat out lie. So if you do a quick Google search of exactly when he took the show on the road, it will come back as 1956. But what's really strange is that the first bucket that was ever introduced was in 1957. So are you really saying that he got rejected 1,009 times and developed the first bucket all in under 1 year? This is a little crazy, right? It had to have started way earlier than that. So in 1962 is when he patented his pressure cooking method for the chicken. And in 1963, he already had about 600 franchises with Pete Harman owning 300 of them. Finally, in 1964, just 1 year after, he sold the company for about $2 billion. What's interesting about this is that after doing a deep dive, a lot of KFC's success is actually, in my opinion, attributed to two people. One was Pete Harman, and the other guy is actually Dave Thomas. Dave Thomas of Wendy's. In 1962 to 68, Dave Thomas actually worked for the early KFC, and he had to manage 4 Ohio restaurants that was not doing very well. He was the one who simplified the menu, making it easier for people to get out of analysis paralysis. And then he also introduced the red and white striped bucket. He also convinced the Colonel to get into all of the commercials, and that's why he is known as the second most recognizable person in the world today. By 1974, KFC expanded to over 900 outlets, but by the time he passed away in 1980, he was 90 years old and KFC had 30,000 restaurants in 150 countries all over the world. As much fun as I had doing the deep dive for this video, it actually stirred a lot of questions within me because as the story goes, he went around and he asked for basically a nickel per order. So The question is, how did he make people honor that nickel per order deal? Because if you go around and say, hey, I'm going to teach you how to make my chicken, and if you go ahead and sell this dish, then I just want a nickel per order, and people will shake your hand, and maybe some people will honor it, and maybe some people won't. I find that most documentaries kind of just gloss over this fact and just move forward. But I think that maybe back then in the 1950s, the best possible way of doing this is to measure out exactly the 11 herbs and spices mix. So that, let's say if a 5-pound bag could make about 52, 53 orders of chicken, and adjusted for, a couple of mistakes or sendbacks or whatever reason, he could charge for exactly 50 orders per bag. So every single bag that he sends out, he should get about like 50 nickels in return. But then there's also the idea that what was truly revolutionary wasn't so much the 11 herbs and spices mix, but rather the way that you cook the chicken, because he was pretty much the innovator of fast food when it came to fried chicken. Prior to this, all the fried chicken meals took about half an hour to make. He was able to make something flavorful, tender, succulent in under 10 minutes. So from my perspective, I feel as if that's what the real revolutionary idea is, and not so much the spice mix. So therefore, if you went to a restaurant and showed them the whole process, because it specifically says that he would stay on even for a couple of days to make sure that their team got it right. So he really made sure that you guys were able to replicate his chicken making system, right? And therefore, couldn't a company kind of just agree, and then the restaurateur would just nod along with like, oh, I see, that's how you make it. And then later on, just forget about the 11 herbs and spices, right? Maybe we'll just make our own, like, 8 herbs and spices, 9 herbs and spices. So what? Because truly the chicken making process is what was key here, because without Harland Sanders' innovation, fried chicken probably wouldn't be a fast food item today. So therefore, if they came out with their own proprietary blend of herbs and spices and stuff, I don't see why that wouldn't still sell. Because outside of KFC, you've tried Popeyes, right? You like Church's chicken as well, don't you? Because, they're all pretty good to me. Sure, I might prefer one slightly over the other, but, fried chicken is still fried chicken, and we just want it quick. For me, after uncovering so many truths from developing the timeline, I feel as if, I kind of debunked the whole romanticized myth of an old man relying on true grit. But then again, at the same time, it's way more practical and way more realistic to understand that Harland Sanders actually had a lot of systems and other things in place in case disasters happen, because bad luck hit him over and over and over again, and he was always able to adapt to that. And I think that is the actual key takeaway, and not so much the idea of a guy who just wouldn't take no for an answer.